invariably I can see that there are still people coming on to the session. Hopefully you can all see my screen, and I'm just going to give everybody a little bit of time because I'd really like us to collect tips from you about how you or people you know have built a global career or got themselves to be competitive in a global world, and academia is a global world. So just take a little moment, share any small thing, can be anything that comes to mind. Being nice to people at conferences can be as simple as that, or it can be something more complicated. Really weird that when you're waiting, 1 minute seems a very long time. So, well, look, guys, I'm going to slowly kick off, but I would love it if at some point, even while I'm talking, you would go to Slido and just share one tip, because I figure there's at least 150 people already on the call, and I'm expecting that more will come on. Oh, there's 176 now. So if everybody put in one tip, that would be 176 tips that we would be able to share with you, and we'll make sure that they're available on the website. Just anything small, and looking for things that you can do. It can be to build your career, but just to get that bit more global presence. And so, fantastic. I'm going to now start to begin the session. So welcome, everybody. Today's session is making yourself competitive in a global world. And we all know that the world of academia, of research, is an international arena. It's not alone. In most cases, I think there are some small exceptions in some disciplines, maybe some fields of law, for example, where the laws are not the same, and so it can be harder to have an international career. But on average, academics are global careers. So, and I'm really delighted to have two ARC Laureate Fellows joining for the first time, both Professor Xiaoxin Hao and Professor Tiffany Morrison, and you'll meet them and I'll introduce them a little bit more later on. Usual, love to see your face if you're brave enough. I don't even think I need to say mute anymore because everyone knows the importance of doing that. I do want to acknowledge that today I'm on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and do feel free to share on the chat the lands on which you are on today. We will have our usual format today. So I'm going to talk a little bit, try and bring in a bit of research into the topic. Actually, we're going to try and share a few tips. Then we will hear from our laureates, and then we will have questions. You can put questions into Slido, or you can put them on the chat. And we also already have quite several hundred questions, so we're not short on that front. But let me just sort of start with, well, what is global competitiveness? And I don't think there's actually really a formal definition out there, but I think the things that it feels to me that it's about are things like international esteem. So, and this will vary according to your career stage, but it can be things like, do you get invited to be parts of symposiums? Is your work cited by international colleagues? Sometimes it can be awards, sometimes it can be editorial roles, because you don't get invited to do those sorts of things unless you've got some international recognition. So I guess part of being globally competitive is having that sort of international recognition and esteem. I think sort of practically it means that if you went for an overseas job, in your country of choice, you would be competitive for that job. I think it also means, that if you go for a job locally in Australia, you would be competitive for that role. I've over the many years I've done this, you see a real fluctuation. If things are bad in the US, for example, you might see suddenly a lot of US applicants going for local jobs. So if you are globally competitive, you can still compete, even though there is a flood of international applicants. But it waxes and wanes. I've seen other times where people from overseas, perhaps because of the exchange rate or whatever, are not finding it so attractive to be in Australia. So I think being globally competitive is just about being ready, whatever the cycle is, to try to get those jobs. I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas of what being globally competitive means to you, and feel free to pop them into the chat if you do. But those are the sort of things that come to my mind, and they're the sorts of things that I'll talk about a little bit today. Actually, a very interesting question that somebody put in the chat, which I did want to address, is, will being global undermine local competitiveness? And I would have to say the answer to that must surely be no. And if it did, I'd be worried about your local environment. As in, if for some reason being globally competitive meant that you were not so valued in your local environment, I'd be a bit worried about your local environment and whether that's the right sort of culture. There could be extenuating circumstances, but on average, I would say that being globally competitive is actually good for being locally competitive as well. But why does it matter? And I'll talk a little bit about the why, I think, before we go into the how. Well, again, these are just some thoughts from me. Love to hear any other thoughts that you have. But number one is it broadens your opportunities. I think because you are competitive, it means that you've got opportunities, and that always is a good thing, because it means you don't get stuck in a terrible job that you hate, for example, because you feel like you couldn't get a job anywhere else. If you're globally competitive, you know that you are able to get work in other places, locally and in other countries. And that gives you, I believe, a little bit of agency and power even, because it means you've got choices, I guess. So I think that that's one real advantage. Of course, if you are globally competitive, it helps with all the things, that are relevant to our careers, like getting promoted, getting grants, these sorts of things. But I think I would probably say, for me, the most important thing here is it actually, I believe, creates more meaningful and interesting work. Having just come back from a big conference that I go to just about every year, it's called the Academy of Management Conference. It's usually in the US. There are around about 10,000 people that go. I've been going now to that just about every year for 25 years. And it's sort of like reconnecting with family, because I know the people there. We have great conversations. I keep up to date with what's happening in the world. It's interesting, get to go to other countries. So I just personally think that if you're part of a bigger conversation, an international conversation about your research, that it makes it more rewarding and meaningful. So that's really probably fairly personal opinion. But that to me is partly why being global matters. So let me just talk about how to build. And as people who come on the series know, I like to try and delve into some research. There's actually not any that I could specifically find on global competitiveness, but I think that global competitiveness comes from sort of two broad things that we talk a lot about on Women in Research. And the first is just doing excellent research. I think that's the first thing that shapes whether you are globally competitive, because if your research isn't really of good quality, then it's going to be much harder for it to be taken up and of interest to international colleagues. I found a recent study, actually, which is a review of 30. So it pulls together the findings from 36 studies across 29 countries. Sorry, I did my slides late at night. So sorry, that's a bit of a mistake there. But it's these are all studies that look at what predicts academic success, right? So there are 29 studies that do that. And this piece of work just sort of synthesizes all of that research. And, first of all, there are demographic factors. We've talked many times already on women in research, how on average, women researchers score lower on things like citations, number of tier 1 publications, all of these sorts of things, not because they are women, but because usually of things like career disruption, bias, these sorts of processes that we talk a lot about. But they manifest themselves in women on average scoring lower if we use that purely quantitative metrics like papers and citations. Age, of course, if you're older, you score better. That makes sense. Actually, family status is interesting. At least this review was suggesting that for women, having a family is actually lowers your scores on average. That makes sense because we know that still on average, women taking up more of the burden, I shouldn't say burden, more of the duties around family, childcare, etc. And so it has more of an impact on women's careers on average. So those are demographic factors. There are individual factors. Actually, how much you collaborate internationally is a predictor of things like your H index and your number of citations and your number of quality papers. So that's interesting, I think. I'm saying that research excellence will contribute to international collaborations, but actually international collaborations also contribute to research excellence. Another driver is intrinsic motivation. I mean, it makes sense, actually. If you personally really motivated as a researcher, that's your passion and interest, you're going to put more effort into it. And so you're going to, on average, get more papers and be more cited. Your skills matter. The quality of the journal that you publish in matters. So that, again, there's lots of research papers that show on average, again, there's always exceptions, but on average, if you publish in better quality journals, you will tend to be more cited and internationally recognised. There are interesting job and work factors. Having tenure helps. Again, no surprise, but workload. The proportion of your job that is allocated to research makes a difference. Again, that's not rocket science. But I know many people who work in business schools or in departments who have quite high teaching loads. And of course, in that scenario, that is going to influence the research outputs. And that's something we need to make our senior leaders aware of. Actually, another interesting one, and this one was particularly important for women, is department collegiality. So people who work in departments where they feel, women in particular, where they feel there's a strong sense of support and collegiality tend to, on average, perform better. And then finally, there are sort of factors that are a bit outside of our control on average, but the institutional ranking of where you did your PhD matters, and often particularly where you did your first job. So, people who do their PhD at Harvard, for example, have got a natural advantage in this. I'm going to leave that there. We have 2 women in research sessions already about sort of building research excellence and having academic impact. That I put them up there, number 13 and number 34. So for those who want to go a bit deeper into some of these ideas, And I talk there, and others talk there about things like, how it really helps to develop a program of research and other things. But I'm going to leave that there. The other big bucket, so the first big bucket, I think, for global competitiveness is just to do good research. So that's number one. I think the other big bucket is about networks and connections. And those things usually go together, but I do know people who do great research, but who don't network and connect with people. And I also know people who network and connect and who don't necessarily do great research. So they are separate things. But there is a lot of evidence. And again, it is something you want to go deeper on. Have a look at our Networking for Everyone Women in Research webinar number 12, which is really about the power of networks. But I just wanted to share one example study, and this is a study looking at management researchers. But it is a study that looked at what they call social capital. So how many different co-authors you have. So, collect everybody's papers and then analyze how many co-authors they are. This is in the field of management, so it could be different in other fields. But, and then are you publishing in different sorts of research fields? What this study showed, if you are, then you will have more papers in high quality journals and be more productive overall. And the reasoning there is, it goes back to this theory called network theory. If you have diverse ties or diverse connections with lots of different people, that stimulates more creative knowledge generation, more creative research. So that's an interesting one, right? So that's really an argument for having a lot of broad connections. You don't need to have a deep connection with a million people, but having those connections, knowing people at least, can be helpful. The other interesting finding in this paper was that they also found if you've got strong ties that are close, then you end up with more citations. And this actually is very like that finding that I just said about collegiality. If you've got a network and you've got really good, strong ties, not millions of people, but 4 or 5 people that you really have good connections, strong, that's a source of mentoring, that's a source of support, that's a way of sharing knowledge, and that it can help you with the success of your career. So this is really all an argument for saying, you need some close relationships with people that you feel you can reach out to and call up and chat to and share your paper with, whatever. And you need a broader array of diverse ties or connections. And that taps you into lots of different areas and can help stimulate creativity. So that is all I'm going to say today about that, other than talking about questions. But I love this question that we got from someone. How should I make myself known to the world when I'm juggling parenting, career success, and getting old at the same time? And I just wanted to bring back here this concept of small wins. And that's what this series, Women in Research series, is called, the Small Wins series, because it's about recognizing that just about many academics are stretched. And so the ability to do and sometimes people are constrained, it might be, one tip might be do your PhD overseas. But if you can't, because you're in a dual career relationship and your family's all here, you're not going to be able to do your PhD overseas. So what are some small things that you can do? And that's where I've encouraged you to put some tips here in the Slido. And I just remind you of this concept of small wins, right? And this comes from the book Tiny Habits, I think it comes from. And what the idea here is, you can stay in your comfort zone and do nothing. Just stick in your comfort zone. you can try and move overseas to do a PhD, and you probably may fall into the overwhelmed, too stretched zone. What you want to be doing is thinking, what can I do that's small and manageable, but is going to stretch me and grow, but also look after me at the same time. So small tips, small things you can do. You can't relocate your whole family. You may want to, that's great. But what else can you do to build global competitiveness? And I'm going to stop there and go to Lana, and I'm going to really hope, and Lana is a PhD student here at the Future Work Institute and has very kindly stepped into the role of question asker. She is going to share with you some of the tips that have come up. And by the way, feel free to put any more that spring into your mind into that Slido, because we will share them on the website afterwards. So over to you, Lana.
Thanks, Sharon. There's some wonderful tips that have been added and popular on the poll here. You'll see these on the screen. Intellectual generosity and supporting others. That seems to be a theme. There's a few other comments along those lines. Looking down the list, not being afraid to attend events alone and making use of the networking opportunities. Work with international colleagues and collaborators. You learn heaps about other academic environments through these interactions. There's a theme with LinkedIn and also staying contactable. So making sure you're easy to find and engaging on LinkedIn, which I thought was really, really helpful. But yeah, there's some great tips that people have added, so thank you.
Brilliant. And you might pull a few more out later when we come back to you at the questions. But I want to just pick up on that intellectual generosity theme. You know, I've lost track of the number of times where, you know, someone from usually Africa or sometimes somewhere, some other continent where it's perhaps a bit harder to access research, have written to me and maybe asked for a paper of mine or just asked for something small. And I try really hard to respond. Now, if you're listening and you've written to me and I didn't, I'm sorry. I try really hard if I can to respond, because honestly, those small things can, you know, I've had people come up to me at conferences and, you know, talk to me about the impact that had on their life, the fact that I bothered to reply. Or, you know, sometimes I'll get an invitation. Hey, we'd like you to have come to our first conference in our country on this topic, you know, because so that's that intellectual generosity. I mean, I don't think that we do it just for the reciprocation, but I think that often there is a flow back into and it builds that network, you know. So that is a small thing that you can do if you can, if you're asked and also small things to ask for help too. And again, you won't always get it because people are overloaded, but sometimes you will, and that can be a great connection. So thank you so much. That's it from me. I'm going to go back to the screen and we are going to just introduce our laureates. That was Lana. Sorry, there's a picture of Lana there. I'm going to introduce our two Laureate Fellows who are going to share their thoughts on this topic. And we'll actually go to ARC Laureate Fellow Professor Tiffany Morrison first, who's from the University of Melbourne. And as you can see, she comes out of a STEM sort of area, and she can say a little bit more about herself, but you can read there. She has done amazing things in her career around governing changing oceans and environmental change and critical topics like that. So we'll go to Tiffany first, and then we will go to ARC Laureate Professor Xiaoxing Hao, who is a Scientia Professor, and she is also coming to us from a STEM topic around renewable energy engineering, and is currently an ARC Laureate Fellow. Actually, it's just sort of some connections between your research there. I say as a very naive person in these areas. But we are so delighted to have them. It's their first time on Women in Research. And so we will hear, first of all, from Tiffany.
Thanks, Sharon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you beautifully. Thank you.
So my name is Tiffany Morrison, and thanks, Sharon, for the invitation. Before I proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woi, Wurrung and Bunurong people who are the traditional owners of the unceded land on which I work at the University of Melbourne. Sharon has asked me to talk about not the written rules, but the unwritten rules about how to make yourself competitive in a global world, and in particular about the challenges, the opportunities and the approaches I have used. So I'm not actually STEM. I work in a STEM, that's right. I work in a STEM field and environment, but I'm actually a social scientist. So I'm sitting on the fringe. And I'm a laureate at the University of Melbourne. I also have 2 kids, and I have had tenure at 4 universities: Flinders University, University of Queensland, James Cook University and University of Melbourne. And I've moved between teaching and research positions multiple times. In 2011, when my kids were really little, I nearly quit my job at UQ because I could not see a pathway through the discrimination and the work-life challenges that were confronting me at the time. And so what I want to talk about today is about how I overcame that, because I think that's probably what some people are interested in. I notice there's a lot of ECRs, MCRs in the audience today. So the challenges for me in overcoming that and, developing international competitiveness were, first, I'm very introverted, which many researchers are. That's why they're so good at research, because they like being by themselves and thinking deeply about things. I'm Australian, and in Australia, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be when I was younger, but we still have the tall poppy syndrome, and we still have backlash against successful women, which can feed into imposter syndrome. And so overcoming that is really difficult when you have to put yourself out there. And I had some, and I still do have all-consuming carer responsibilities. So the opportunities for overcoming the challenges I had and continue to have, and for building international competitiveness. First, I was fortunate enough to take the advice of some smart senior women around me, not academics. One of them was a female GP, and the other one was a professor in a different school, actually, who was a professor of leadership at UQ. And some sympathetic male colleagues. They all convinced me not to quit when I was about to throw in the towel. And so I feel like that's why I agreed to give this talk, Sharon, because I wanted to pay tribute to those people, because they don't know, or some of them might know now, but they were pivotal to me being here today. Those people gave me this advice, which I now give to others. Get involved in a mentoring program and find a mentor. Learn to work smarter, not harder. Learn balance. And in those 3 opportunities, I did some background reading at the time, because at the time no one was giving proper advice about how to do this. There was very little written about it. Most of my senior colleagues were men who didn't understand what I was going through, and were also just busy struggling in quite a hostile work environment themselves. And so I came across some books, which I'll mention now, which I think are worth reading. If you're an introvert, there's an amazing book called The Power of Quiet by Susan Cain, which is life-changing for introverts to read, particularly researchers, because there are a lot of examples of how successful researchers have survived in a research world, which also makes you feel like you need to be extroverted. There's a really old book called Advice for New Faculty Members by Robert Boyce. And the subtitle of it is Nihil Nimis, which is Latin for everything in moderation. And that book is about how to manage your day so that you get what you want out of it and can still have a life. There's one chapter in there in particular which is amazing, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then I read 2 other books, which are generic books. I'm sure there are new ones out there now, about working smarter, not harder. So there's all sorts of tips and tricks, like read your email at the end of the day, not the beginning of the day, that kind of thing. But also another book about the perils of workaholism, because I think if you're going to read all these books about how to work better or work smarter and harder and just be better at your job, you also need to make sure that you don't take it so seriously that you end up a workaholic. So I actually read another book at the same time about the perils of workaholism, just to keep myself, in check. Okay, so they were the opportunities, this advice from this mentoring or group of mentors, and these strategies for working smarter and not harder, and learning balance. In terms of approaches to building international competitiveness, I think you need to start small and start slow. So international competitiveness isn't built overnight. It's built iteratively and in small increments. So go slow and be steady and be patient. The first thing to do is identify your niche and develop an elevator pitch for describing it. The second thing you want to do is ask your mentor or your network to help you visit the most important international lab in your field and the international conference in your field, and visit them effectively. So ask for introductions, so you're not just turning up there unannounced and you don't know who to talk to. Then develop a 5-year plan, which includes that visit to that important international lab and that best international conference. So alternate one per year, and make sure that you give a talk either at the lab or the conference. I think the US is still like the biggest and most powerful academic community for many of us, and it's getting to the US. If you're an Australian, getting to the US and getting that US experience is really important, at least once in your career. They do not have the tall poppy syndrome there. They are, ambition is not a dirty word. It's good to be promoting yourself there. It's good, other people want to promote you. It's quite an amazing experience to experience an international US conference in full force, and can really help you overcome imposter syndrome or tall poppy syndrome if you're Australian, because it makes you realise it's just a cultural thing we have here that doesn't have to apply. You don't have to sign up to it and play by those rules. It's okay to be ambitious. And when you do visit those international labs or those international conferences, yes, you have to give a talk, but you also need to have a view to driving collaborations with international colleagues. You want to build collaborations, and you need to be prepared to drive them. You can't wait for other people to invite you along and you to ride on their coattails. You need to be willing to put in that effort, and people will respond. The other really good...
One more, Tiffany, and then we'll go to...
Okay. So diarise 30 minutes of every working day after lunch to cultivating your international profile. So this is a really good strategy for you to not neglect your international profile and to make it meaningful, not transactional. So promote members of your team and your network, and be generous in doing that. And in doing so, you're accidentally sort of promoting yourself. So it doesn't seem like self-promotion. If you be generous in promoting the people around you, that can really help against this backlash against successful women, because you're promoting your team, not yourself. And also, if you don't have anything to say on social media, then maybe write an email, dedicate that half hour to writing a meaningful email to a colleague that you would like to connect with overseas, either sharing a paper that you have written or engaging with a paper that they have recently published. And it's just about, making friends. There's in a way, we can be quite lonely in our ivory towers. And if you reach out to people across the world who share similar interests to you, you can make new friends. I've made lifelong friends that way. It's, very rewarding. So I have some more things, but I'll save them.
Yeah, so we'll come back to those in the questions. So whatever you get asked, you can put them into the answer. Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you also for sharing your difficult journey. We are all grateful that you did not quit, but also I think this shows the power of that relational environment that, the research actually shows the importance of supportive collegial environment. And maybe if people out there don't have that environment, that is probably one thing that it might be worth trying to, consider moving away from. But thank you for sharing. And I love the fact that when you're stuck, you turn to ideas. And we are researchers, right? You turn to ideas in the form of books or whatever. And all the people on this call are turning to ideas, even just by being here. So thank you. I think that's a really powerful sort of meta strategy for all of the challenges that we face. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Xiaoxin, who's going to share some of her tips for this topic.
Thanks, Sharon. First, I just want to thank you for inviting me to join this webinar. I also like watching some of the webinar series before. I found it's really useful and lucky I see this one. And first, before I want to share my experience, just want to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owner of all the lands on which we are work and live. I have slightly like a different background. There are a couple like changes in my career. I did my bachelor and master in China, and then PhD in USW, and then started all my academic career here. And in addition to that location and change, I also there are change in my like education background as well. For my bachelor and the master degree, my major was trained on the mythology, and then when I started my PhD, I chose the solar photovoltaic that belong to the semiconductor physics part and the devices area. For me, I feel like for the set up the competitive, first, I just want to say being competitive like doesn't mean like competing with everyone around you. I treat this one more means like developing something like a distinctive, for example, like a own expertise and idea, and particularly more important, scientific identity, like the figure. Whenever people talking about something, people think about you. I feel that one is like a competitiveness. So like because like I switch, like actually I changed my major. So actually there are a couple of like things I encountered like challenges and difficulties when I started. And I think similarly, I have two kids, and also like my husband is also academic as well. So it's like a dual academic family. That's make me even busier. So because like both, we all know like academic never have stopping hours. Like sometimes we have to think a lot of things even after work. But I feel for me, like I think like when I started on the new major, like a different world, I actually am lucky to have a very good supervisor, like introduce me into this new field. And after my PhD, actually, I also like switched to a different like PV materials. I think no one in Australia working on that one, and also no one in my school like working on that one as well. I found like extremely difficult. But one thing if I look back, one thing I did really right. I feel that's reaching out to the best people internationally working on this area. That's how I found that's really like helping me a lot. So I remember like when I started to working on that one, I saw like one thing I really want to do. I want to really working deep in this topic, not trying to be like get people to know me from that one. I learned from a lot of other people at that time. Like I looking around, like who is working on this one, and who is the best person working on that one. Then luckily I found a group of people, scientists in Europe. They have this type of like a workshop every year, but they only have the workshop like 2 days for the workshop. I think I benefit a lot from that one. After I finished my PhD since like 2011, I basically joined them and learn from them every year. So I think there are only like 2 times I got the interruption. I didn't join them. And that's the time when I have a baby. So because I have 2 kids. So I feel like the most important thing is collaboration. and working with the best people. So that actually make me like continue to working on one area and make deep in the area until like I think even back to 2018. I mean, I led my group to get the best performance, that type of like devices in the world. So I got like a set leadership in that one. Then I started thinking what I should do next. That one is only one solution to solve the problem for the next generation solar panel. So I start to going broad. Like in addition to that one, because I got more energy, I got like a more thought whether I can looking at something else. Then I think that's the timing I start to build depths. Then build breadth. So similarly, I take the similar strategy, like looking at who is the best in the world, working in those areas, and start to join like the workshop and also attending a lot of like conferences. So with that one, it really helped me to build those breadths as well. So far you can see there are two things I found like really important. The first strategy, I think, choose the important problem and keep you focused on that one. So I feel like that one really like helped me a lot, because I feel like everyone, I mean, all our time is actually very valuable. And we all have like a limited time because of like work and the family and the balance of work and family. So we should put our time in the most important part. We have a passion and we want to working on. So that's the first thing. The second one, you see, what actually I get a lot is building the depths before the breadth. Then when I have more energy and much better like skills, I can spread around. So even by tackling one problem, but I can have multiple areas, multiple solutions that I can working on. And also from that one, so the third one I want to say collaboration, a particular international collaboration. I really think like that helped me so much to learn, because for example, in one of the area, I started the collaboration with a lot of like researchers in Europe. They're working on that area, and then later on, like in US and in China, and then I built all of these links together. So now like so one of the area, like we meet with each other. Once per year, we have the workshop and sharing the findings and discoveries and sharing challenges as well. So that actually make me like get a lot of like different perspective of what other people are thinking about, like what I'm researching on. So that's, I feel like a very, very like important. Quickly, like I think after like in 2015, I started to have a tenure job as a senior lecturer at the UNSW. Then I start to like I need to grow in my group. Then I found like a lot of like skills. I don't have them at that time. So luckily, I think UNSW, I think also initiated one of the very important fellowship. We call it Santia Fellowship at that time. Luckily, I was the first round of like a fellowship. I got that one. That one gave me some additional fund, allow me to, for example, traveling overseas to the industry partner, and also travel to other like universities and to exchange our ideas and establish like initiate more collaboration. But more importantly, I think that one really gave me additional support on some of like a coaching seminars, the coaching courses as well. For example, communication skills, like how to build adaptive leadership, and all of those things that help me to building up my skills. A lot of skills, including the particularly like for the communications, because I found like because I'm working in the
I'll get you to make this your last point, because then we'll go to questions. Okay.
Yeah. So these skills, I feel like continue building up the skills is really important, because we need different skill at different career stage. So that one, if you haven't think about that one yet, so that one I think definitely a very, very important strategy. So just like to summarize the four important strategies I have had built on my experience. The first one, focus and choose an important problem. The second one, build that before the price. And the third one is collaboration, and particular international collaboration. And the fourth one is build up skills, and particular skills we found we like at different career stage. That's I want to share for so far.
Thank you so much, Xiaojing, and a goldmine of tips there. And interesting how, you're also talking about the importance of keeping on learning and growing, which never ends, really, I don't think, no matter what career stage you are. And the other one I was going to pick up on was this idea of identifying the best and reaching out to them. I think that's a terrific idea. And I'd just say to people out there who are PhD students who perhaps, if that feels intimidating, you can also reach out to the PhD students of the best people, because they are the people who might end up being in symposiums with you at conferences and things like that. And they are an indirect way to get into the world of the research of the best people. Thank you so much. Now we are going to go to Lana with some questions for the three of us. So back to you, Lana.
Thank you, Sharon. So I have the list of questions that the participants have sent through prior to the seminar. So flowing on nicely, the first question I have is for you, Sharon. So what are the most important skills that will help graduates stay competitive internationally? And I'm going to double barrel it with another question around how do you identify your gaps to grow and develop those skills?
Yeah, that's a very, very big question. But I think I would sort of put the skills into two categories. And one is the research skills, because that goes back to that research excellence. You can't be excellent at research if you haven't built your skills. So that's sort of important. But I do think the other set of skills are the communication sorts of skills. And this doesn't mean being extroverted. Tiffany, you highlighted, how challenging it can feel if you're quite introverted. But you can be an excellent communicator who's introverted. You can communicate through multiple mediums. When you stand up at conferences, if you're a confident presenter, even if you're an introvert, these things make a huge difference, actually. So, and reaching out to people in an appropriate, courteous way, or an appropriate way for the culture, these things matter. So if I had to consolidate it into two, to be research skills, but also those communication skills that are really essential for building the networks and the collaboration.
Excellent.
And I'll leave the gap question to someone else. So yeah, or if you want to repeat it for someone else.
No problems. Xiaojing, the gap question, how do we identify our own gaps to be able to work and develop on those?
I feel like one of the important things I always do is, for example, I mentioned like at a different career stage, I always see something probably there is a gap. How I do that one, I always do a lot of like a reflection and review about what happened to something. For example, after publishing like a paper, I found like, okay, those part, for example, how to present a very good work in a very compelling way. That's something that part probably we don't have it. So, and the particular when I mentor and supervising a student, I always found not just get some good ideas and doing some very good work, and really getting the whole the results in a compiling way. That's really important to get the publication in a very high quality journal. So I think from that part, I usually for my own way, I also have the similar things as well. For example, after I attended a conference, after I finish a presentation, I usually do some a review and reflection. What can make me do better? what hasn't been really well when I deliver something. So I will always do a lot of like review and reflection. So it doesn't mean like, for example, I did really a bad presentation, but even with that one, I'm thinking, did I make a presentation engaging, and did I got a lot of questions from the audience, and what is missing there? What is the gap there? So that's something I feel very important. So for identify gap, review and reflection after a couple of things is always good.
What I hear there in your answer is both the reflection, but also a very strong learning focus. So,
Yes.
we've talked a lot about this on Women in Research, about the importance of and it's hard if you're a perfectionist or whatever, but the importance of being open to learning from mistakes. And, and so you modeled that very beautifully there. Thank you. Lana, back to you. Let's have another question for Tiffany.
Tiffany, you mentioned before the elevator pitch. So one of the questions that came through is on the topic of networking and giving an elevator pitch about yourself. How do you come up with one?
So there's heaps of advice on the internet about how to develop an elevator pitch, including for research purposes. So first have a look at that. But then the trick is really to practice it. You need to practice it on people. So ideally find some peers who are at the same career stage as you who also need to develop an elevator pitch and practice it amongst each other. Listen to theirs, write down your comments and give your comments back to them in a constructive way and get them to do the same thing for you. And then possibly try it out on your mentor. So, practice makes perfect.
Excellent. I would just add that, if you're thinking of going for a laureate out there, I think you sort of need a laureate. You need an elevator pitch for your laureate almost, because you have to communicate the value of your research to your peers. That's sort of easy. They already buy into it, but, they got to believe that it's credible and all that. But you've got to persuade people who are completely in different disciplines. And that's where that elevator, and in a sense, if you've got that elevator pitch, you expand it out in your laureate application, but really you've got to be able to convey that, don't you, Tiffany and Sharon? You've got to be able to convey to a non-expert audience what your research is and why it matters. So practicing even different sorts of pitches to different audiences also can be good. Thank you. And Lana. Oh, sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
I just want to say that, because to getting my a laureate, I got a success in my second time. In the first time, when I look at the assessment report, I feel, how could I score that one? But as I mentioned, quickly reflection and review what I wrote in the proposal, I feel targeting, because you always need to know who is the audience. Is a mixed panel, who have different disciplines, or it's a focused panel only in the engineering. That's really important. So that's not just I feel in the a Laureate Fellow application, but also one trying to get a project with the industry. We always need to speak in the industry perspective, and that's our audience. So always knowing the audience, who is the audience, is very important.
Yeah, great tip. Lana, back to you.
We had a very simple but very important question for this topic, and that's how important is travel in the process of being competitive globally? Sharon, do you want to start?
Look, I don't think it's very hard. It might depend a bit on disciplines, but I think that if you want to be part of the international community, you'll need to travel. But all three of us have children, and all three of us, have at times maybe not been able to travel, or I've always often taken a baby with me, whatever, different strategies for different people. But I sort of feel it's probably unavoidable, because honestly, nothing beats physically being with people in the room. Yes, once you know people well, you can have a great catch up online, etc. But without those, so look, I'm perhaps old-fashioned. I think travel is extremely important. It actually really, I don't want to swear here, but makes me cross at how universities treat travel, which is they treat it like we're on some sort of junket, and put all these ridiculous layers of bureaucracy, etc. That makes me cross, because it's extremely hard work traveling. and working, because we're always working while we're traveling, keeping up with our day job. But I think it's super important. So I'd love to hear what Tiffany and Xiaojing think, but for me, it's essential. Not always possible because of children, etc. But, you know, a career is a long thing. You know, it's not something you're all trying to achieve in 1 year, but over a career, it's important. What do you think, Xiaojing? Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Sharon, because I can compare like some of the travel period when we can travel, for example, all other time and during the COVID time. During the COVID period, most of the conference actually online, right? So I can clearly tell like during the online like discussion, you sometimes like you got a similar information from the presentation during the conference, but you don't have a lot of time in-person discussion. I found like in-person discussion actually is very, very important. That's how I feel, because some of the information you won't get like from the online, but during the in-person like discussion with other like scientists in the world, that's really important thing. So I like travel a lot, but definitely as you said, traveling is not easy for us, and particularly we have kids. And for me, like my husband is also academic, so we sharing the traveling period. So we put like all the like traveling breaks in the family calendar. So I have two calendar, one family calendar, another working calendar. So we watch out like who is away, but we need to make sure at least one parent stay at home looking after the kids. But definitely, I think traveling is important, and talking to the people is very important, because talking to the people in person and online is very different.
It's different. And I can see people are saying funding is an issue, and that's sort of what makes me mad, you know, because to me it's really essential, and it shouldn't be so hard to get funding as researchers to do this. But you know, this is where you have to put in for the small grants, and sometimes even people will fund it themselves, which is not fair, but it's a necessity. Do you agree, Tiff, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to break bread with your colleagues. So not just have formal intellectual conversations with them, but also to share a meal or a drink or something. I have two strategies for juggling kids and travel. I've quite often, at least probably once a year, except during the pandemic, brought my family to a conference, and we've tacked a family holiday onto the end of it. For that, you have to have a supportive spouse. And I think that's really crucial. And I think I was going to say this earlier. One of the early learnings I found really useful, and I was part of a career progression for women program, which was held at UQ, and they drummed into our heads that you need to get your home life in order if you want to have a successful career. So you need to be able to have a supportive partner or supportive extended family. You need to take shortcuts at home, or you need to delegate at home. If you can't do any of that and you're trying to do it all, it's not going to work.
And we've had quite a few laureates come on here, Tiffany. You'll be pleased to know that say one of the most important things you can do as a female is choose the right partner. You know, and so I suspect if we did a survey of female laureates, many of them would say that. Look, we just have 2 minutes left. Lana's probably got another question, but I don't think we can squeeze it in. Look, I just want to thank our guests today, Xiaoxing and Tiffany, for being open and sharing your comments. What it made me think actually is I think we should do one on travel, you know, because I think there's a lot of tips around travel, how to get the funding, how to manage it, you know, these sorts of things that it might be quite interesting to share. So if people like that idea, we'll try and do that. Thank you, Lana. First time in the role, and you did a brilliant job. So very much appreciate that. Thank you to Isabel behind the scenes. Last of all, thank you all so much. I'm just trying to look on my slides to see what's next. Oh, it is social capital, I think. Is it? Building your social capital, which is really networks. So that's a perfect one to follow on from this one. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. I think we had 250 or 70 or so people at our peak. Terrific. Well, we finished 12 o'clock. Thank you, Tiffany, Xiaoxing, and I'll email you separately, but really lovely to meet you, and thanks so much for sharing your time and insights today. And thank you, Lana.
Thanks, Sharon. Nice to meet you both.
Thanks for sharing.
See you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.